Now, this story comes from a Reddit user. It's a true story that happened to a close friend of his who works as a mortician in a small town in Texas. It was just another day at the funeral home. He had just finished embalming an elderly woman who had passed away peacefully in her sleep from an apparent heart attack. The woman looked very peaceful and serene. The mortician's friend was actually quite fond of her, so he took a bit more time with her, making sure that he did a good job. After he finished with the embalming, he left the body in the embalming room to go get lunch. He only took about 15 minutes to go get some food. But when he came back, the door to the embalming room was wide open, and the corpse was sitting upright in the chair and laughing. He ran to the room and slammed the door shut. He tried to catch his breath. Was he imagining things? Was it a hallucination? Then he noticed something strange. The corpse was still laughing, but it wasn't making a sound. The mortician's friend could hear the corpse's laughter, but it wasn't making a sound. It was like he was laughing silently. At this point, he was freaking out, not knowing what to do, so he did the only thing he could think of. He picked up the phone and called his boss to come as fast as possible. When his boss arrived, he was skeptical, but intrigued. Neither of them had ever experienced anything like this before, so they watched the corpse for a while, not knowing what to do. At first, the corpse was sitting upright in the chair, but eventually it started to slump over, clearly not used to moving after being so still for so long. Eventually, the corpse fell to the floor, hitting its head on the concrete floor. This is where things got weird. The two men were watching the corpse the entire time, and neither of them were paying attention to the door. But suddenly, someone or something opened the door and walked into the room.
Oh.
The men were too afraid to look, but they heard footsteps approaching them. Then the voice of one of the funeral home employees said, "What's going on here?" Startled by the voice, the two men turned around to see one of their colleagues walking towards them with a confused look on his face. He asked them what was going on and why the door was open. The men explained what had just happened and how they were too scared to leave the room. Their colleague looked at them for a moment, then started laughing. He told them that he had just been in the supply closet across the hall and had no idea what they were talking about. He asked if they wanted some help, and then went back to work. To this day, the mortician's friend doesn't know what happened to that corpse. He couldn't explain how a dead body would be able to move on its own, and even less, how it would be able to laugh without making a sound. He also couldn't explain how the door to the embalming room was opened, or why their colleague didn't seem to remember the incident at all. He knows that there are some things in this world that we simply can't explain, and this seems to be one of them. Now, this story is absolutely terrifying, but it reminds us that there are some things in this world that we simply can't explain. One minute everything is normal, and the next minute a dead body is sitting upright and laughing. It makes you wonder what else is out there that we don't know about. So what do you think happened in this story? Let me know in the comments below. Did the corpse really laugh silently, or was it a hallucination? What about the colleague who seemed to have no memory of the event? Let me know your thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up button and subscribe for more creepy content. And as always, thanks for watching. Welcome back to another episode of our channel where we bring you the most mysterious and terrifying stories from all over the internet. Some of these stories are scary, some are sad, and some are just downright creepy. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more. Today's story is about a body drawer that cried. It was submitted by our user, so I won't say their name. They said, "I used to work as a coroner in a fairly busy city center mortuary. We had two main fridges, one for unclaimed bodies, and one for those that were awaiting post-mortem. Obviously, the latter would have next of kin visiting, and sometimes they would ask us to open the fridge while they were there. I never had a problem with this, even at 3 a.m., when the only light came from the emergency exit sign and the fridge light. I'd walk around explaining the difference between the two post-mortem changes, rigor mortis and lividity, all the while feeling like I was being watched. I'd then leave them alone with the body, and the only sound that would break the silence would be their sobs or gasps. Anyway, one night during a particularly busy shift, I was taking swabs from an obviously deceased person who'd been brought in after an overdose. I was interrupted by one of the technicians on her break rushing over to me, pale as a sheet and gasping for air. She told me to come quickly because something had happened in one of the drawers. The drawer had been making muffled crying sounds, but it was empty. She swore she'd seen the chest rise and fall like someone was breathing inside of it. Of course, I didn't believe her. I told her it was probably just the building settling and walked away. I couldn't help glancing at the drawer as I walked past. It was slightly ajar, and there was a faint sound coming from inside. I shut the drawer fully and carried on with my work, thinking nothing of it until about half an hour later when the same technician came rushing over to me again, eyes wide with terror. She was gesticulating wildly at the drawer now and screaming at me to listen. I did, and my blood ran cold. It was definitely a muffled cry this time, like someone trying not to sob too loudly so as not to disturb others. Being a skeptic that I am, I got up from my chair and walked over to the drawer. I pulled it open, and nope, there was no body in it. I searched visually and with my hands, making sure there was no one hiding in there. There wasn't. I closed the drawer and told her to go and wash her hands and get over it. That's when I heard the noise again. I whirled around to face the drawer, and it sounded like a sob, like someone had been holding their breath underwater and had just surfaced, except there was no one in there. I swear my heart stopped when I heard that because I'd searched the drawer just seconds before. I tried to convince myself that it was just a very realistic sound, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt like I was being watched. I don't want to admit how long I stood there frozen, staring at the drawer, but eventually I decided to call the police. Better safe than sorry, right? Especially when your line of work deals with death on a daily basis. I called the station and explained what had happened. They took the details and told me they'd send someone over. While I waited, I went back to my work, trying to concentrate on the task at hand. When the police arrived, I showed them the drawer and they searched it. And yes, you guessed it, no one was found. The police left after finding nothing of interest, and I was left to clean up the mess. I swear I could feel eyes boring into my skull the whole time I was in there. Once the coast was clear, I let out a huge sigh of relief and got back to work. I never did find out if anyone else heard the sounds from the drawer, but I still hear it sometimes, especially when I'm trying to sleep. Well, that was our spooky story for the night. If you liked it, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. I've been your host, and we'll see you next time with another scary story. Alright, here's another scary story for you guys. The morgue's music box. When I was about 9 years old, my family and I moved into an older home. The home had been in my family for many years, but it had sat vacant for at least 6 years prior to us moving back in. My great-great-grandmother passed away in the home. And before we moved in, my grandmother and I went through the house to see what they could find to give us, the next generation. In the attic, my grandmother found a very old wooden chest. She brought the chest downstairs and opened it up. Inside was an old music box with a ballerina on top. It was very dusty and cobwebby. There was also a handwritten note that said, "To my little Susie, may you always remember me. Love, Nana." My mom's name is Susan, so we all thought this must have belonged to my mom. When she was a little girl, Mom wasn't really interested in keeping the music box, so she put it in my room. First, I thought it was cool that I had this antique music box, but then I realized that it was a little creepy. The ballerina was missing a leg and an arm, and the music box was always slightly off-key, even though it never seemed to be playing on its own. The music box would only play when no one was watching it. We would hear the tinkling of the music box, look over and see the ballerina dancing, then quickly look away. When we looked back, she would have stopped dancing. One night I heard the music box start to play, but it was a different tune. I was too scared to get out of bed and check it. The music box continued to play for about an hour. In the morning, I got up and went over to the music box. It was still playing the weird tune, and the ballerina was in a different position than she was the evening before. It was then that I noticed the ballerina was wearing a little girl's dress. The night before, I distinctly remembered it being a nightgown. I became convinced that the music box was haunted and tried to throw it out, but my dad wouldn't let me. He said that it was just a silly old box and that there was nothing wrong with it. He told me to stop being such a baby and to stop making up stories, so I gave up on getting rid of the music box. For the next few weeks, the music box would play on and off. Sometimes it would be the normal lullaby that it had been playing for years. Other times, it would be a creepy, discordant tune that sounded like it was from a horror movie. The ballerina would always be in a different position when I went to check on it. Sometimes she would be standing in the corner of the room, sometimes she would be on the floor. One day my parents were out running errands, and my brother and I were home alone. We were watching TV when we heard the music box start to play. This time it was the really creepy tune. My brother and I looked at each other. Then he said, "Let's go check it out." I wanted to tell him that it wasn't a good idea, but before I could say anything, he was already out of the room. He reached the music box and the ballerina and then screamed at the top of his lungs. I ran into the room to see what had happened. My brother was standing in front of the music box with his foot sticking out like he was trying to trip someone. The music box was knocked over, and the ballerina was lying on the floor, its head almost completely separated from its body. It was then that I noticed something strange. The ballerina was facing the opposite direction that she had been facing before. Somehow, in the short time that my brother had been gone, she had turned around. My brother started to cry and begged me not to leave him alone again. That's when I knew the music box had to go. I convinced my dad that it was dangerous and that we had to get rid of it. He finally agreed, and we took it back to my mom's house. As soon as we got it inside, my mom said that we should burn it. So we brought it out back and put it in a fire pit that my dad had made. As it burned, the music box started to melt, and the ballerina's face became distorted. Once it was all burned up, we took the remains out back and buried them in the garden. After that, my brother and I never saw or heard from the ballerina again. But every once in a while, when I'm outside and the wind is blowing just right, I can still hear the faint strains of its music. That was the end of the story. If you like this kind of content, please stay tuned for more. Welcome to my channel. It's the most terrifying graveyard story I've ever heard. It was sent to me by a subscriber. He said it happened to their great-great-grandfather. So I don't know if there's any way we can verify this story, but here it is. The year was 1896, and the place was Highgate Cemetery in London. The story begins with a gravedigger named George. He was a veteran of the British Army who fought in the Crimean War. One day he was working in the graveyard and he heard something strange. It was a loud scream that seemed to come from the soil below. At first he thought it must have been a cat or perhaps some other wild animal. But then it happened again. George stopped what he was doing and he listened intently. He heard the scream again. It was definitely coming from underneath the freshly dug grave. George was a brave man, but he was also a very superstitious man. He didn't like the idea of digging up the grave to take a look. In his mind, that would surely disturb the dead and invite whatever evil spirits may be lurking around the cemetery to come after him. But at the same time, he was very curious. After all, he had never heard of such a thing happening in the cemetery before. He took a few deep breaths and tried to calm himself down.
Ow.
Then he grabbed his shovel and started to dig up the grave. As he did so, he muttered to himself, "I'm only doing this for the poor lady. Whoever she is, I hope she doesn't mind me disturbing her rest." He continued to dig until the coffin was just below the surface. Then he stopped. With his hands shaking, he reached into the grave and pulled the coffin lid open. He was expecting to see a corpse, but instead, he found nothing. The coffin was empty. George immediately slammed the lid shut, jumped back, and ran as fast as he could to the cemetery gates. He didn't stop running until he got home. Once he was safe inside his house, he told his wife what had happened. She, of course, didn't believe him. She thought he was just making the whole thing up to scare her. But when he insisted that he was telling the truth, she agreed that they should go to the cemetery the next day to check the grave. They went to the cemetery the following day, but the grave was empty. There was not a single trace of the coffin or the body inside. To this day, no one knows what happened to the woman who was buried in that coffin. Some say that she was never actually dead in the first place, and that she managed to escape somehow. Others say that she was the victim of a grave robbery, but I don't think that's likely. After all, if whoever was robbing the grave saw that there was no one in it, they would have simply moved on to the next one. I personally think the most likely explanation for this mystery is that the woman was never buried there in the first place. Perhaps the coffin was placed in the grave, but the body was taken somewhere else. Or maybe the body was never placed in a coffin at all. And finally, perhaps the whole thing was a case of mistaken identity. Maybe the gravedigger dug up the wrong grave by accident. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And remember to subscribe for more scary stories. Thank you for watching. Welcome back to my channel where the body doesn't always stay in the box. Today's scary story comes from a mortuary worker. I was working as a mortuary tech at this funeral home, and there was this one guy who worked there. He was just a body mover, so he didn't do embalming or anything like that. His main duty was to move the bodies in and out of the funeral home. Now, this particular day, he was moving a body out. The family had just picked it up, and he had brought it out to the viewing area and placed it in the coffin. It was an open casket. When he went to close it, he noticed that the camera on his phone was actually recording. He had accidentally hit record. He stopped the recording and looked around to see if anyone had seen him. No one had. So he decided to take a selfie to show off how clean his station was. He took the picture and sent it to his girlfriend. About 10 minutes later, one of the funeral directors came in to check on him because she was about to leave for lunch and wanted to make sure everything was okay. She saw the picture that he had taken and told him that he needed to be more aware of his surroundings. To which he replied, "What do you mean?" She pointed to the background of the picture, and he turned around to look. Behind him in the doorway was a very clear image of a woman in a black veil watching them. Her face was completely obscured by the veil, but her eyes were visible, and they were glowing a bright white. He immediately called out to her, asking who she was and what she was doing there. When he did that, the figure turned around and walked away, walking down the hallway as if she were heading to the embalming room. He told the funeral director what he had seen, and they decided to go look for her. They walked down the hallway and found the door to the embalming room slightly ajar. They both looked at each other, unsure of what to do next. The funeral director slowly opened the door and peeked inside. The room was empty. There was no sign of the woman anywhere. They checked all of the embalming tables and even the old body storage freezer just to be sure that she was hiding somewhere. But the entire room was empty. Never saw the woman again. But to this day, he still wonders who she was and why she was watching him. Did this mortuary tech just see a ghost? Maybe. Do you believe in ghosts? Let me know in the comments. And if you do, have you ever seen one? Maybe you've seen the ghost of a patient who is dearly missed. I know I have. I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, I think I did. I told you that story in a previous video. If you want to hear more stories like these, then stay tuned. I publish a new scary story every week. Thank you all so much for listening, and let me know in the comments what you think happened in this story. Did this mortuary tech see a ghost, or was there another explanation? I know there are bound to be a few people who say that this is fake. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. I also want to say thank you to everyone who has subscribed and left kind comments. I'm so glad that you're enjoying these videos and found them helpful. I put a lot of time into researching and writing each one of these stories, so it really means a lot to me when people enjoy them and want to support me. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want to, I would really appreciate it. Anyways, that is all for me today. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye. Welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to look at the scariest hospital room that hates cameras. If you don't believe in ghosts, then don't watch this video, because once you hear about all the terrifying things that have happened in this room, you might just change your mind. Or if you do believe in ghosts, then definitely watch this video because it will only strengthen your beliefs. If you think our operating room is scary, just wait until you hear about what happens in room 309. This room is located in a hospital that was built in 1925 and has been the site of many mysterious events. In the early 1960s, the hospital decided to install cameras in each patient's room so they could keep an eye on them. But for some reason, every camera installed in room 309 would mysteriously break within 24 hours. This happened over and over again, no matter how many times the hospital tried to fix it. It wasn't until years later that the night shift nurses discovered why. One night, a nurse stayed in the room overnight. She was alone with her patient, and she heard what sounded like voices praying from the walls. The next morning, when the sun rose and the other nurses came into the room, they asked her, "Did you see anything?" She told them about the voices she had heard, and they simply laughed and said, "That's just room 309 being weird again." So that nurse thought nothing of it. But as the day went on, more and more strange things started to happen. First, the lights started flickering, then the bed started shaking violently. Finally, the wall-mounted TV started showing snow, even though there was nothing wrong with the antenna. At first, she thought that maybe she was just imagining things, because she was exhausted from working the night shift. But then her partner came in and started experiencing the same things. They tried to ignore it and go about their day, but it was impossible. They couldn't even get the door to close properly, as if something was trying to prevent them from leaving the room. At that point, they knew they had to call for backup. As soon as the other nurses entered the room, everything stopped. The lights stopped flickering, the bed stopped shaking, and the TV went back to normal. They tried to convince themselves that it was all in their heads, but they had all experienced the same thing together. Now, whenever the nurses worked the night shift in room 309, They bring along an EMF reader, a ghost hunting device that can detect electromagnetic fields. Whenever the device goes off, it means that there is a high concentration of energy in the room, which could indicate a ghost. Sure enough, as soon as they enter the room at night, the EMF reader starts beeping like crazy. To make matters worse, they have never recorded anything on their EMF reader that looks like this before. So what exactly is going on in room 309? There are two possible explanations. The first is that there is a ghost in the room that doesn't like cameras or any recording devices. The second explanation is that the hospital built the room in 1925, which was a time when lobotomies were common. It's possible that the ghost of a lobotomy patient is haunting the room and doesn't want anyone to know. I'll let you decide which one you think is true. In the comments below. Let me know what you think is going on in room 39. Is it a ghost or something else? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, then check out my others about haunted hospitals. These hospitals are scarier than you can imagine, and if you still haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Click the subscribe button now so you don't miss any new videos. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching. Welcome to my channel. Today's scary story is about a nurse who happened to witness something unbelievable in the middle of the night while working the night shift. The night nurse was taking her rounds as usual. She checked in on all of her patients, making sure their needs were being met. She gave one patient water, turned another patient to prevent bed sores, and checked the bandages on a third patient's wounds. As she made her way down the hallway, she noticed one patient's chart had updated automatically. The patient's name was Albert, and he was under hospice care. The update read, died 2:17 a.m. The nurse looked at the clock above the nurse's station. It read 2:16 a.m. The nurse thought it was odd that Albert had died exactly 1 minute before the clock struck to 17 a.m., but she wasn't too surprised. Albert had been very sick for a long time. His family had been at his bedside the night before, and they told the staff that if he did pass away, they would not be bringing him back to life. So the nurse assumed that his family was with him when he died. She also didn't think much of the fact that the chart had updated automatically, because sometimes the hospital's computers did that. Other than the weird time of death, there was nothing wrong with the chart, so the nurse left it and moved on to her other patients. She finished up with her rounds about 15 minutes later and headed back to the computer to chart her notes. When she looked at Albert's chart, she saw that it had updated again, this time to read 2:17 a.m., which meant that he had died exactly at 2:17 a.m., like the chart had predicted 1 minute before. The nurse couldn't help but feel a chill go down her spine. She worked in a hospital that had seen its fair share of deaths, so she was used to seeing the time of death on the charts. But this was the first time that the time of death had been predicted on the chart, and the fact that it had been predicted 1 minute in advance sent shivers down her spine. She tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that came over her and focused on her work. About an hour passed without incident. Then the nurse heard the code blue alarm go off. Code blue meant that a patient needed medical attention stat. The nurse quickly made her way to Albert's room. She walked in, she saw his nurse shaking his shoulder and yelling, "Wake up, Mr. Williams. You need to wake up right now." The nurse stopped what she was doing and asked what happened. Albert's nurse explained that the equipment that monitored Albert's heart rate and oxygen levels had started going off. By the time she realized that it was signaling that Albert's heart had already stopped beating, it was too late. He had died. The nurse checked the time on the clock above the door. It read 2:17 a.m. After the code blue team left and Albert's family was notified, the nurse went back to the nurse's station to chart what had happened. When she looked at Albert's chart, she saw that it had updated to reflect his new time of death. 2:17 a.m. The nurse couldn't believe what she was seeing. She had never experienced anything like this before. She wasn't sure if she should be scared or impressed. She knew that Albert's death was no one's fault, but she couldn't help but wonder if the fact that his chart had predicted his death time had anything to do with it. As the days passed, the nurse couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. She couldn't get the image of Albert's lifeless body and the eerie accuracy of his time of death out of her mind. She started to second-guess herself, wondering if she had done something wrong in the moments leading up to his death. Had she missed something? Did she cause this? But she knew that that wasn't true. She had done everything right, and then it hit her. This was just a case of remarkable coincidence. There was nothing more to it than that. But the experience had shaken her up, and she knew that she would never forget it. The next time she went into Albert's room after he was gone, she noticed something strange. His chart was no longer on the wall outside his room. She wondered where they had moved it to. Maybe they had taken it down to make room for a new patient. But that wasn't the case. She checked the room next door and the one across the hall, but she couldn't find it anywhere. It was as if it had vanished into thin air. The nurse thought it was weird that the chart was missing, but she didn't think much of it. She figured that it would turn up somewhere else in the hospital, but she was wrong. The chart was never found, and no one at the hospital seemed to know what had happened to it. The nurse chalked it up to another strange coincidence and moved on. Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, please subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time. In the dead of the night, when everyone in the hospital is fast asleep, the door to operating room 2 opens by itself. It opens exactly at 3:33 a.m. every night. For the past 5 years, the hospital has been trying to fix this problem, but no one knows why the door won't stay shut. The maintenance team has replaced the door 5 times now, but every time they do, the door ends up opening on its own. Some patients have even claimed that they see the ghost of a little girl standing in the doorway at night. Hi, I'm your host. And today I'm going to tell you about the hospital door that wouldn't stay shut. Our story begins in the coastal town of Atami, Japan. Atami sits between Tokyo and Osaka on the coast of the Pacific Ocean. The city has hot springs, museums, art galleries, temples, and shrines, as well as an enormous aquarium. But what it doesn't have is a hospital. Actually, it used to. There was a public hospital in Atami until 2014, when it closed down and was demolished. At the time, the local government said that the hospital was nearing the end of its useful life and would cost too much to repair. So they decided to build a new hospital nearby and transfer all the staff and patients there. You know how they say that nothing in life is free? Well, that's certainly true in the world of medical science, because transferring from one hospital to another isn't free. For some reason, the Japanese government didn't want to pay for the transfer of all the patients. So instead, they did something even more sinister. They released 300 patients back into society without any way to get their medical records or contact their doctors. When the remaining patients heard what had happened, they got really scared. What if someone important like their family doctor retired and then they couldn't get their medical records? To put their minds at ease, the hospital made them sign documents saying that they would be given priority for readmission to the new hospital. These documents were stamped with the hospital seal and dated. For a few months, everything seemed fine. Then strange things started happening. Former patients began showing up at the old hospital, only to find it demolished. They tried calling the number listed on their documents, but it had been disconnected. Some people managed to get their hands on a piece of paper with the new hospital's address. When they went there, they were told to go home and wait for someone to contact them. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but nobody ever called, and then the nightmares began. Former patients started having recurring nightmares about a little girl in a hospital gown standing at the entrance to an operating room. She would beckon to them with her finger, urging them to come closer. Then she would evaporate and they would wake up screaming. One day, a former patient named Tomoko Tanaka decided to do something about her nightmares. She gathered 29 other former patients, and together they filed a complaint with the health ministry. The ministry launched an investigation, but it quickly fell apart when they found out that the hospital had been keeping detailed records of its patients. Tomoko and the others weren't special. They were all terminally ill and had been sent to the hospital for experimental treatment. But after their so-called treatment failed, they were abandoned. As for the little girl, we don't know who she was. But since the incident was widely publicized, many locals began claiming that they knew her name. Some said it was Yuriko, while others said it was Mitsuko. According to legend, both girls died in the hospital under mysterious circumstances. Now, you might think that this is where the story ends, but it doesn't. After the incident was publicized, the hospital became a tourist attraction of sorts. People would visit just to catch a glimpse of the ghostly operating room. One day, a group of paranormal investigators showed up. They brought cameras, EMF readers, and other equipment to try and document the ghost. But the door wouldn't open no matter what they did. A few weeks later, a construction crew showed up. They removed the door, and brought in a new one. Finally, the mystery was solved. Or was it? 3 weeks after the new door was installed, it began opening on its own again. Every night at 3:33 a.m., the door would creak open and stand on its own for several hours. Sometimes the lights inside the operating room would turn on as well. The maintenance team was called in to fix the problem, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong. They checked the hinges and the frame to see if something was catching, but everything seemed fine. The team ended up replacing the door 5 times over the next few years, but each time it opened on its own anyway. To this day, no one knows why the door keeps opening. Some say it's the ghosts of the former patients, while others say it's the hospital's way of apologizing for what it did. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If you liked this video, check out my podcast. Thanks. Bye. The burned man that called home. A man burned in a car crash was declared dead. At 2:44 a.m., his phone called his mother.
Ow.
All that came through was static and weeping. This happened in 2011 in Australia. The burned man that called home was 23-year-old Joshua Brethnock. He had gotten into a single-car accident near his home. Apparently, he had been speeding and lost control of his vehicle, flipping several times before bursting into flames. Emergency services arrived at the scene soon after the accident. They found poor Joshua in a ditch on the side of the road. His legs were completely burned off, along with both of his arms. The fire had also burned away most of his face. There was simply no saving this guy. He was rushed to the nearest hospital where doctors worked for hours trying to save his life. But sadly, their efforts were in vain. Joshua was pronounced dead shortly after arriving at the hospital. What makes this story the tiniest bit creepier is that before he died, he made a phone call. You see, Joshua's family had gone to bed not knowing that their son and brother had been in a serious accident. At 2:44 a.m., as Joshua lay dying in a pool of his own blood and the blood of his recently deceased pet dog, who had also been in the car with him, he somehow managed to dial his mom's number on his cell phone. His mom, Carmel, woke up to the sound of her son's voice on the other end of the line. He sounded scared and in pain. "I don't know what's happened," he told his mom, his voice barely a whisper. "I can't move. I think I've just had an accident." He then started crying. "I'm really sorry, Mom," he whispered. Then all went silent. Just as quickly as the call had started, it ended. At first, Carmel assumed that it had just been a wrong number. Who else would be calling her at 2:44 a.m.? But when her husband went to check the phone, they saw that it was, in fact, their son's number that had called. They tried calling back, but it went straight to voicemail. Still confused, the couple went back to bed, assuming that whatever it was could wait until morning. But at around 4:30 a.m., their phone rang again. This time, it was the police. They told the couple to get to the hospital as fast as they could. When they got there, they learned that their son had died. What makes this story so sad is that this wasn't the first time that Joshua had called his mother in the middle of the night. A year earlier, he had called her while sleepwalking. He had gotten out of bed, walked to his parents' room, and dialed his mom's number from their home phone. "I called out to him and he didn't answer," Carmel recalled. "I thought, how strange, but I put it down to sleepwalking, and that was that." Little did she know that her son's calls in the middle of the night weren't going to end so peacefully the following year. Joshua's story is a sad one, but it also serves as a reminder to all of us to call our moms more often. We have no idea how much time we have left with them, so we should cherish every moment we get. Now, I'd like to hear from you. Did you find this story sad or creepy? And have you ever lost someone close to you in a car accident? Share your thoughts with me in the comments below. And now for the big question. What should I cover next? Please choose between these 3 options. 1. The terrifying reason why women should never use public toilets alone. 2. Disturbing details about Jeffrey Dahmer's childhood. Or 3. Creepy things that have been caught on security cameras. Vote by leaving a comment below. Whichever option gets the most votes will be covered next. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It really helps my channel grow. Also, be sure to follow me on social media for updates and random stuff. Until next time, remember to stay safe, stay happy, and goodbye. Welcome back to another episode of Forensics Files. I'm your host, In this episode, we're going to be discussing an incident where a body that was supposed to be dead moved during an autopsy. But before we get into it, if you love true crime and all things paranormal, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We release 2 new episodes every single week. On to today's episode. Imagine you're a medical student just trying to get your degree so you can move on with your life. You're given an assignment, a training exercise where you have to perform an autopsy on a body. Everything is going well. You've finished the external examination of the body, and you begin the more intricate work of the internal examination. You make an incision, and as you are making this incision, the body moves. Well, that's exactly what happened at a university in Italy. Medical students were performing autopsies on 2 separate cadavers when one of the bodies moved its hand. This would have been an incredibly shocking moment for these students. However, the professor overseeing the training exercise was not shocked at all because it had happened before. This body had actually been donated by a 78-year-old woman who had been a magician as assistant for most of her life. She even performed on the very day she died. So this would explain why the body was moving around? Well, not exactly. When the professor went over to examine the hand that had moved, he noticed something strange. The body had smiled slightly, like it had been in the process of smiling when the movement was interrupted. This was not a reflex, as the body had been embalmed. This wasn't the first time this had happened either. The same thing had occurred 3 years prior when the woman's husband had been autopsied. He had also attempted to smile. What could be causing this? Was this woman really a magician, or was there something else at play here? Well, according to the professor, this was neither a case of the supernatural, nor a case of the living body trying to come back to life. He explained that these were simply the effects of a living person attempting to do something in their final moments. You see, when someone is about to die, their brain will attempt to prolong life. It does this by sending signals to the muscles, which results in a tightening of those muscles. The professor likened it to a sprinter being in a starting position, all flexed up and ready to go. Except in this situation, the person isn't trying to run, they're trying to live. This may explain why the body tried to smile. In the case of the first autopsy, maybe she had a traumatic experience while on the table, or maybe she did and want to be autopsied. Whatever the reason, her body reacted in an attempt to escape this situation. It's not clear whether or not the woman specifically requested not to be autopsied, or if she simply did. Like the idea of the final moments of her life being spent on an autopsy table. But whatever the reason, her body reacted in the way that it did. This isn't the first time something like this has occurred. There were cases in China and the UK where bodies of people who were about to be cremated suddenly sat up. These reactions are almost always involuntary, and the body cannot be revived. These reactions can occur in other animals as well. There was a case of a monkey who was scheduled for an autopsy. As the pathologist began the procedure, the monkey twitched and then opened his eyes. Of course, this was incredibly shocking to the pathologist. It's nothing out of the ordinary for those who work with animals. It's common for animals who are about to be euthanized to put up a fight. And sometimes during that fight, they might end up opening their eyes or moving parts of their body. These animals aren't coming back to life. They are simply reacting to stimuli. So what should you do if you find yourself in this situation? If you're working with a human body, the best thing to do is to stop what you are doing and wait for the body to relax. If the body is moving around erratically, you should leave the room and allow the body to relax on its own. However, if you're working with an animal body, then the best thing to do is continue the procedure. If you stop, the animal may panic and struggle, which will only make the procedure more difficult. So was this case a case of the living trying to escape the clutches of death? Or was it a case of a brain attempting to trick the pathologists? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you follow us on social media. We share updates and fun stuff there. I'll see you next time.